Good evening. Good to hear
You-
from you. We haven't talked in a couple months, you know?
I know. You've been going through a little drama, huh? Is everything okay?
Yeah. Life moves forward. Yeah, so it is
Yeah.
what it is.
Yep.
You know, yeah. Uh, I'll live.
Hey, hello.
Yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Slowly, I'm returning a little to normal. I haven't really gotten any research done,
Mhm.
but there have been papers I've been wanting to write. I don't honestly have the time now. I'm into a couple little side projects. I canceled all my side projects, and now I've picked up a couple. My latest has really been the crypto game, but I'm not. My mind is still on a lot of things like operations research, and of course, my heart and mind is never far from plasma electromagnetic cosmology.
Mhm.
So, saw you did a show on Atlantis the other day. I thought, I don't think that we ever really did a deep dive into, utilizing my paper and talking about Atlantis. And I actually always wanted to write a sequel to this paper because there's been a few good things that have come out since I wrote this paper. I wanted to do one on Ashes of Atlantis, and unfortunately, there's a popular YouTuber who has given people the false impression that the Eye of Rakat is Atlantis, and
Mhm.
when we get time, I can debunk that pretty easily because I know that there are a number of your viewers who probably go to his channel, and he's a very likable guy, a very affable and bright guy, and
Mhm.
he's just wrong. It doesn't really take much effort to debunk, actually.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, you know how the alt stream is full of loads of people with really good ideas, but not too many people do what I do, which is to gather the data, put it into a paper, and invite the world to come and attack.
Mhm.
It's all there, and I put my citations and I put my data, and then it's just up to them to really come forward and say why they agree or don't agree. And that's how I do it. That's my engineering and scientific background. I
Mhm.
have a lot of respect for people in the alt stream. I don't have a lot of respect for bad theories. Now, I
Right.
do have a paper where I compare the limit of EPMC is not able to completely debunk the ancient alien hypothesis.
Mhm.
And all this really kind of started because I had started a Facebook group to look at Atlantis, ancient alien architect, and electric universe. And
Mhm.
of course, you could see electric universe won out top, but Atlantis also won out
Mhm.
as well. It did very well. The paper I did comparing the ancient architect hypothesis, I admitted I can't debunk every bit of it. But that's the problem with pseudoscientific hypothesis. In fact, just before this call, an article came through from SciTech Daily where now there are scientists admitting there may not be dark energy, that maybe it's something else. So the
I've heard.
mainstream itself is busy starting to debunk itself, and that I wrote about that in a paper. I predicted that they would start stealing the electric universe in the mainstream, and about 6 months after I predicted that, the first charged dark matter paper came out. So I had made an entire series of 8 dark matter papers, and I just got bored of finding new bad pseudoscience to debunk. But by the time I got done, they had dark photons and negative mass and or some of the other acoustic sound waves in space. I mean, just the most amazing nonsensical things that come out of the so-called mainstream, and they are so swimming in nonsense that they don't really realize that they're debunking themselves from previously. For example, the new black hole image came out,
Mhm.
right, from M87. You can
Mhm.
see that there's no clear event horizon, number one. Number two, there's volumetric waves in the so-called accretion disk, right? Because it's a plasma cloud. And then there's magnetism, which means guarantee you there's electricity. So already they've basically debunked that it's a black hole, an actual, like an object that you would say is a black hole. But because their paradigm is more like a cult than it should be, they really can't escape that. And one thing that I always try to do with EPMC is to avoid that kind of mentality, because I was trained in that in the standard model, and now I'm very wary of that. Not only because I practice alternative medicine, but because I think that we've seen enough of the lies of the standard model to start thinking, hey, what's really going on? And the quest for Atlantis is a prime example of both the mainstream burying truth and the alt stream putting forth drivel. And the combination of those two, it really reminds me of the chase for the truth about King Arthur. The same situation. Or the search for civilization in North America or in the Amazon. The same situation where it's well-meaning people go down bad paths, and unfortunately that gives strength to the mainstream, who just chooses to bury everything and to pretend that, you know, that an UPART doesn't exist, or there's no way that there could be diffusion, or the Atlantis search is full of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's very frustrating. So that's why I wanted to write Ashes of Atlantis. I never got to, but I did write this Unboxing Atlantis 3 or 4 years ago now. The idea here is to bring out of the box some of the truth of what's actually out there. Mm-hmm. And of course, it starts, you know, right. Obviously, the story of Atlantis. I've got it there on page 3 with Solon. If you scroll down to page 3, it'll let people read it while we talk about it. Mm-hmm. I think the story from Solon, from Plato from Solon, about a conversation with a priest. If you just scroll it down, I think it's
more. Yeah, we're back to it.
What it isn't? I think it's control. Maybe control plus. Yes, that's it. Ted taught me that. Yeah.
You can go a little bit more if you can.
Okay.
Then people will be able to read it.
Control plus. All right. Okay.
Can see it, then hopefully the audience can see it. So anyways, back to it. The reason why I think that the story from Plato from Solon, who was talking to a priest, is so compelling, is there are details in it that are really almost too compelling for it to be completely nonsense, considering that Plato would not have had access to Google Earth. And then on top of that, one of the things that the Egyptian priests had told Solon is that the Greeks had forgotten everything because of the deluge and the multiple floods from before. Now, you remember we did this show on Enki and the World Order. Enki and the World Order, it referenced the high carp floods caused by Enlil, and it referenced a deluge caused by the touching of Enki's left side to our horizon. Mm-hmm. So those were two different events that it referenced to create floods, which corroborates what the Egyptian priest is saying. On top of that, one of the things that's been pointed out by that very nice young man on his channel is that there really is a lot of fluvial evidence when you look at Google Earth going over the Sahara. And I mentioned in this paper, which I came out with this paper before him or the other guy over at Ancient Architects, and they had kind of a back and forth about, you know, where's Atlantis. They had various theories that they were putting back and forth. But before they mentioned that, I actually had a paper that already talked about the Sahara being a place that is likely to contain lost civilizations. Mm-hmm. And I also did the Amazon for all the information about the Amazonian dark earths and all that came out, right? It was just the beginning of the mounds that were coming out from the octagon mounds and such that were coming out. So when I put out this paper, I said that it's almost certain, because of the that there are lost civilizations in the Sahara and in the Amazon. Okay, and then there are signs of the fluvial thing, and there are whale bones in Mauritania, again around the Eye of Rakat, but it's the Eye of Rakat is not Atlantis. Okay, so what these things tell me is that there is some reliability to the Egyptian priests and Solon in relaying this information to Plato. So I've always found Plato to be very compelling. If Socrates was an invented character, he is the most well-invented character in history. And if that trial wasn't as Plato described, it's, again, a very compelling trial and testimony. So when I read these kind of details that we see here about the power that came forth and the Straits of Heracles, and how far, as far as I'll probably butcher this, Tirhania, and when we see how it's described the destruction of Atlantis, I cannot come to the same conclusion that Dave Talbot came to, that Atlantis is merely another example of the shining city motif.
I agree with you, and also, just the name of the ancient gods. I think that when they say that they were Atlantean kings, that might have a possible ring to it, or of truth to it, because where else would they get the names from outside of making them up out of thin air?
And I don't know, I can't disprove it. And it's sort of like, again, that young man and his very bright channel. He makes this point that it's the Atlas Mountains that are north of the Eye of the Rakat, which is after King Atlas. Well, to me, that means more likely he was named after Atlantis, not that Atlantis was named after him. You need to remember that we're talking 12,000 years ago. This is not a small amount of time for a lot of things to become buried and become lost. Now, the thing that I do in the paper is I cannot directly attack the issue. I do put forth my own hypothesis later in the paper as to where Atlantis is. But I spend a good deal of time, as you scroll through to the next page, talking about, we have, when I was a child, Atlantis was a joke. It was like the triangle, the Bermuda Triangle and aliens. Okay, well, since growing up here, everything that we were taught as kids in school has been debunked. UFOs are confirmed to be real. We don't know if there are aliens in them, or if it's the government, or if it's plasma. And we have found lost sunken continents, several of them, and that they had sort of hidden from the public that they'd already found the lost city of Dwarka. And in fact, there is a documentary on YouTube of a young man who makes it his mission. He's an Indian American. But he's fascinated with his ethnic background. He goes to India. He goes to the city of Dwarka, and he tries to charter a boat to actually go and scuba dive Dwarka, and it is illegal. And he goes to the university and speaks to people. And essentially what he's told off camera is that after they were going down into Dwarka and they were doing the archaeology on it, a few years.
Where's Dwarka? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, there's a city, Dwarka, on the west coast of India, but the actual ancient city is about 10 miles out into the ocean or so, and of course buried under the water. Right now,
are you aware of the satellites that find the outlines of cities from space?
Yeah, many. There are many sunken. That's the thing, is that there are many sunken cities around India and Asia. Okay, well, he went, and he was told that some unknown Western power, maybe American, maybe British, An archaeological power came in and told that university in India under no uncertain terms that excavation of Dwarka was over.
Hmm.
And so when he tried to attain his permit, he couldn't get one. And the same thing has been happening with the what they call the Bohemian Row or the Biminian Row. I mispronounce that all the time. Down in the Bahamas, is that it suddenly became very difficult to get permits to go and visit some of these underwater sites, but they're happening at an accelerating rate. So, for example, we have Mauritania has been confirmed in 2017. Dwarka was, 1983 to 1990. Zealandia, 2017. Doggerland, 2012. And even since writing this paper, there have been more evidence of sunken lands that have come out since I wrote this paper. And they continue to reveal that the actual land surface that we had available to us as humans was much larger. And this is very interesting because there are a number of Amerindian tribes that claim that they fled a catastrophe from the west, that they came from the west and not from Beringer seas to essentially their equivalent of sea peoples. It was wars that were caused by the shrinking of Sunderland.
I have heard recently that this is being called a hot zone for something that they've discovered, but they're being very discreet about. And when you look here at this, what is that? Is that a patch? Are they hiding something with that?
Are you? I see. I'm
on the map. Yeah, it's the zone from between Florida and
right.
Cuba. And
I can't see what you're looking at there. Unfortunately,
I'm looking at what's called the hot zone. It's between Cuba and Florida and the Atlantic Ocean.
They found this is something that isn't known. They have found basically
Bimini is, and ground is rising right now. I'm sorry.
The Bimini Row is, but all along the coast, there are buried coffins and graves that are 8,000+ years old. Wow. The whole area was a hotbed of diffusion activity. Okay, so first of all, it's funny the mainstream won't call it diffusion when Mongoloid-based DNA natives come from Asia over the Beringer Strait. But if you have Polynesians follow birds and currents and find their way over to South America even earlier, then that's somehow diffusion and it can't be talked about. It's all diffusion. People are constantly moving because it's a function. It's a natural response to the change in resources of the environment, to catastrophes, to opportunities. The whole reason why the Welsh kept coming over to Onfwyn or Avalon over here in the Ohio River Valley was to escape persecution, no different than the pioneers and pilgrims. People are always on the move. Diffusion is a fact. And it doesn't mean that the uniformitarian view is completely wrong. When you have catastrophism, you still have uniformitarianism. It's like this. A cave is formed slowly. But on a cave, the cave gets flooded, and that will create massive changes in the cave. But that doesn't mean that the cave is no longer having the slow formation of stalactites and stalagmites and other formations. That's still happening. But on occasion, there will be earthquakes and floods that drastically change the nature of the cave. And that's how the earth works all over the place. And now catastrophism is back, and it's official. From the giant waterfall happening in Montana to also the catastrophe that created basically the gap there at Manhattan and New York, to the Straits of Gibraltar breaking open and filling up the Mediterranean. Catastrophism is pure and simply back.
Oh, you can just look at the Earth and tell.
You could tell. You could say
Yeah.
you could see these massive fluvial changes. We now have multiple. We have the Greenland strike site. We have the one off the coast of Madagascar. We have, of course, the one in the Yucatan. Heck, we've got a couple here in Kentucky, plus the Thunderbolt strike site here. These are sites of sudden and rapid change. So it's unreasonable for us to continue to tell youngsters in school that the Great Pyramid was built by slaves, and that there's nothing interesting has happened, and humans emerged out of the center of Africa and just moved around until we suddenly had colonialism. These are not facts anymore. The facts are that things were much more interesting. People were moving about, discovering new lands, building pyramids in far-flung places. In every ocean, there are islands with step pyramids in them. They were creating earthworks far out of necessity for making calendars. You don't need to make the Great Serpent Mound so big to mark the equinox. That is illogical. You don't need to do it that large. You don't need to make Stonehenge out of the most difficult stones to move across the landscape in order to mark the rising of the sun. That isn't why it was built. And this story, it needs to be overthrown. It needs to be confronted directly. Anytime someone is peddling the standard model, they've got to be checked with the facts, because actually science still works, and the scientists themselves are putting out tons of data. That's one of the great things about EPMC, is that I promote the merging of mainstream science and the alt-stream science to find the best answers, the Occam's razor. Because if it's their data against them, it makes it very hard for them to keep peddling that information. The sun is the solar fusion lie is a great example. You don't need to go very far. You just talk about thermodynamics. They have no answer for that. The Big Bang, there is a star older than the Big Bang. So there's either something wrong with redshift, which is going to basically debunk Big Bang.
Alton Arp discovered that. He debunked it. They just have their head in the sand when he found redshift was intrinsic to the age of the galaxy. I prefer disproved over debunked.
Or Big Bang doesn't make any logical sense. And there are so many outliers now that there really is no reason to entertain the lies anymore. It doesn't mean that they stop, because there's a lot of YouTube channels that make their money off of getting loads of clicks of people that come in and chant, yay, big science, big capital S science. But actual science requires looking at all the evidence. And as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had Sherlock Holmes say, it's only when you've included all the facts, no matter how improbable or impossible the theory seems, it must be the truth. Right. And that's the case with Atlantean age civilization, Atlantean age lands where people existed that no longer exist. We know Sunderland was a thing. We know Zealandia was a thing. It's almost assured that the continent of Mu or something like it was a thing, and that the Easter Islanders are the ones telling the truth. It is, to me, the racism to come in archaeology to tell the Easter Islanders, you don't know your own history. You didn't survive a sunken continent. You floated here, and then you chopped down all your trees. And when the Western powers came along and enslaved and made war with you, they really were saving you because you were out of resources. Well, now they've come back. Mainstream science has come back just this year and said, no, it turns out that they didn't wipe out all the trees as recently as we thought. So what are the Easter Islanders supposed to think? What are their youth supposed to think when they're told that their history is not legit and it must follow the standard model? But then the standard model doesn't even have the story straight. The chances are they really are the survivors of a lost continent that sank. And this has happened all over the place. There are still ruins sinking in the Pacific Ocean. And they say that it's because the climate change and the ocean's rising. That is not correct. Anybody who actually studies the literature knows that the ocean level is not going up and down. The atolls are sinking, and the crust of the earth is a very thin veneer. A lot of people don't know this. If you were able to be the size of like a giant god, and the earth was a marble, the crust, even with all the mountains, the highest peaks would feel just as smooth as your finger. They really wouldn't be there. You wouldn't notice the difference between the oceans and the mountains. It's the crust of the earth is a very thin veneer, and it's a unique junction. I cover it in Plasma Electromagnetic Sky. It's one of the weird cases where there's a phase shift. We have liquid below, then solid, then gas, and then plasma, instead of what we would expect, which would be solid, liquid, gas, like that. So when you have a phase shift from liquid to gas with a solid in between, what you have is a volatile place. It's no different than talking about the volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean, where weird creatures are able to survive at impossible pHs and temperatures. They're able to survive because there's nutrients there. And nutrients and life falls best on the edge of chaos. And that's what the crust of the earth is. It buckles very easily. Let me see if I can find, there's a tab or a page here. Now you scroll to, we will come back to some of these graphs. This table is illustrative.
When you were talking about the atolls, I was there on Google Earth. Huh.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Synchronicity, huh?
Yeah. Just
Let's
tell me
see.
what page
Okay.
to go to.
Here we go. On page, we'll get to some of the pretty stuff, but on page 27, and these are pulled from When the Earth Nearly Died. D.S. Allen
and Allen and Dillard.
Yeah, so these are the values that they have listed in their book of up thrust and down thrust on orders of magnitude that really defy, and these are time periods of recent, as far as geologists can tell, which who knows what they really know, I mean, they're not able to carbon date, and how accurate is carbon dating anything anyway. But from what they can tell, these are, relatively recent changes. And we're talking, 2 to 3 miles in some places, and including in the Anti-Atlas Mountains there. 2 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 2 kilometers in Tibet. These changes, look at 4 kilometers at Lake Titicaca. It's such a sudden change. Imagine the effect on the people, but also on the environment. You talk about flash freezing, extinction events, changes in the flora and fauna, and we haven't even talked about the changes of the tilt of the earth or the flipping of the earth. Just the buckling of the crust going up and down. My favorite, of course, is the mountain Patagonia. They look almost assuredly like they've been suddenly pulled upwards. And there are several mechanisms, if that's what you want to go into next, to describe possible ways of accomplishing this without so-called continental displacement, where there's a sudden, movement of Antarctica halfway around the world. I'm talking about vertical displacement, which would again be very, very simple when you consider the thinness of the crust relative to the diameter of the Earth. Most of these diagrams.
I was going to say, you think that Atlantis just sunk?
Yeah, I think it almost assuredly collapsed. And I guess I might as well reveal that I think it's almost assuredly the Azores. Now, is that necessarily going to be only Atlantean civilization, Atlantean age? Because what I set out on the Origins of Religions is that we really need to talk about an Atlantean period. Anything prior to the death of the star, which at the time I wrote that paper, I did not know that we had a different star. That's the interesting thing. When I wrote that paper, I did not know. So when I went from on the Origins of Religions to the megafauna extinction event, I hadn't read John Cook or the Solaria Benaria or any of that. With the megafauna extinction paper, I just went with the moon because the moon is the only object we can see that has the electrical carving and it's facing us and is near us and it's a large enough body. But now we have a pretty good idea that the Younger Dryas was caused by the death of Shamash, because we have the record, we have the egg motifs from around the world, we have all that. Now, if you have a star dying above you, and you have the sudden emergence of these large gas giants, and your orbit is changing over a 3,000 to 6,000 year period, I think it's pretty much a cinch that the kind of power that we're talking about, and the rubbing of magnetospheres and the close proximity, even the possibility, and almost, I would say, almost a certitude that when we orbited Jupiter, that there was an electrostatic lift enabling people, because there's the stories of Thor and Heracles' ability to lift up objects. I think as we get near to Mars, I think that stones could be lifted easily. And why did they abandon making these huge obelisks and Yangshan stones? Which I believe at the end of this paper, there is a graph showing the size of these stones in order. And I even divided them up by the rough era that they came from. I think they abandoned it because it was no longer easy. And why was it easy? Probably because gravity was affected, or there was something offsetting the gravity. If gravity is purely based off of mass, then there was obviously some uplifting force that was moderating. Well, if you have an uplifting force like that, and it comes by in a certain direction, it's a cinch that it's going to buckle the crust. And when you talk about buckling the crust near a mid-Atlantic ocean ridge, where there's a split already in the crust, if that gets lifted and then it collapses down, it's a long ways down. Now, that's just only one mechanism. There's also the possibility that people have talked about with the Earth, the center of the Earth being either a plasmoid or some form of water, heavy water, essentially some kind of hollowness, or even possibly interacting with either ether or neutrinos and gathering those and creating convection currents. So let's talk about these different mechanisms. Let's take the case of it's a plasmoid. If it's a plasmoid or some form of crystal liquid metallic hydrogen, there's going to be changes, and we know this now because we've actually measured the magnetic changes coming from the core. They act like they'll set it out as it's a correction. Oh, it's much more complex than it used to be. Actually, they probably measured it correctly the first time. It's just changing. Later in this paper, I do show they have different maps, and the velocity and directions of the movements of the plates have changed in the last 40 years. So almost certainly the interior of the Earth is modifying. So if you have a liquid metallic hydrogen or crystal plasma core, and it's ejecting material because it's performing essentially an electric fusion inside the core, and it's producing water, and that water is coming up through the mantle, that's going to create pressure, and it's going to buckle things. And then there's going to be sudden motion, and maybe there's gaps, maybe there's a bubble pops that's inside the mantle. And if you have again the mid-Atlantic ridge, how easy would it be for it to cause a buckling? I mean, look at Iceland. It's right now a very active volcano. There's actually active volcanoes on Iceland underneath of the ice, and so the lava is unable to melt the ice in some of these places. So it's being lifted. One day, almost certainly, as the rift spreads, it will collapse down. Iceland will undergo the same thing that definitely happened to the Azores. As to whether or not the Azores are Atlantis, that's another story. But there are, you know what, ruins and pyramids on the Azores. as if
Mhm.
people there or survived and made something out of the place. So
You know what
those,
I always found funny about Iceland and Greenland is that Iceland is green
right.
and Greenland is ice.
That's the famous the
Yeah.
famous
Uh,
I guess it was what Leif Erikson did that on.
I don't know,
Um,
but it must have been different, the weather.
well, that is true actually. When the Earth was so-called upside down, where Hyperborea was Antarctica,
Hmm.
we do know the Orkney Islands at the north of Scotland there had balmy weather, and in Siberia, the mammoths were eating plants that can't be found for another 1,000 kilometers south.
Yes. Yep.
That's
I,
what Velikovsky discovered.
I remember.
Right.
Yep.
So that's one mechanism. Now another mechanism is if we have if it's true that we have these convection currents inside the core and the mantle, it's probably also true, just as we expect with any current in the oceans or the air, that they move. Now, one thing that people are not aware of is that there's not one or two hot spots around the world. Every major continental crust, every plate has hot spot or hot spots in it,
Hmm. Hmm.
and usually they're somewhat in the middle of the plate. Now, if you have an upward convection of magma, that's pressure. I mean, just simple kinetics. It lifts up the plate. Now, as the plate moves along, you have the plate is cooled, not just because it's under the ocean, but because it's no longer receiving that convection, but it's bubbled up. So as it moves along, there's a good chance that it will suddenly collapse, that it will crack and fall, or it will sink. And we see this with Tamil Massif. Tamil Massif, for people who don't know, Tamil Massif is the largest volcano on Earth. It's not quite the size of Olympus Mons, but it is
How you
pretty
spell it?
daggone big. Tamil
TAMU?
Massif, you know what? Picture of it on page 25. There is a scan from Nat Geo.
Okay.
It's very large. It's sort of around the size of Texas, and it's very flat, of course, compared to what it used to be. It used to, of course, go above the ocean. It no longer does, but it dwarfs the size of Mauna Loa. Of course, Mauna Loa
What?
is currently the tallest mountain on this planet from bottom to top. What?
What?
25.
25. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Now, why is Tamil Massif sinking? Or why isn't it? A better question isn't really why is it sinking, but why isn't anyone talking about it outside of volcanologists and mainstream geologists? Why is it not the centerpiece of discussion? Now, obviously, Mauna Loa is very exciting. It's the state of Hawaii. It's the largest mountain in the world in terms of both height and width. But it is well studied and it's above a hotspot. Tamil Massif, though, is the past. This is clear indication that the Earth is changing, and that it's changing in a drastic way. And Hawaii does that too. But in the case of Tamil Massif, we have essentially another. I mean, it's not quite a continent, but it's not. This is no small amount of land. Now, when did it sink? Probably before humans. But
Yeah.
this isn't the only land that has done this. And some of the lands that are discussed potentially could have had people around. Zealandia potentially could have had people around because the Aborigines of Australia insist that they were around 40,000 years ago and that they have records going back 40,000 years. That's around the time that Zealandia started to sink. So now if humans have been biologically modern for 250,000 years, and they have been, and when I say biologically modern, I mean that virtually indistinguishable in characteristics. Obviously, they did not have the same sophisticated IQ that we have now. However, if you were to collect one of their children, you could raise that child to be functionally capable of living in our modern world because they were biologically modern humans for 200 to 250,000 years. But we didn't have symbology till roughly 40,000 years ago. So what were people doing between all that time, 250 to 40,000 years ago? So when we have 250,000 to 240, that's 210,000 years. And these people are moving around. They have every reason to follow new opportunities. I'm not saying that they built boats and they sailed around, but if they did, it's such a long time ago, we wouldn't have any proof anyways, because everything would have biodegraded. There would be literally no way to prove or disprove that possibility. They are finding fossilized footprints in places they didn't expect all the time. It happens quite commonly. I can't remember the last one I saw, but essentially some child found a set of footprints and they turned out to be millions of years old, according to geologists. And it was supposed to be in a region that was impossible for there to be people because, of course, the mainstream story does not allow for anybody at that era of time outside of Africa. And this was much further away. I believe it was in Europe somewhere. So if you have evidence of people potentially moving around millions of years ago, well, it's essentially they could have been in Zealandia 40,000 years ago, and that we wouldn't have any way of disproving it because it sank. Same thing with Sunderland, which isn't far from Zealandia. If Sunderland, Sunderland was definitely a thing, and it definitely had people on it. If all that's left is Gunung Padang, and they won't let us excavate Gunung Padang, the question is, what are they afraid that might be found? Probably evidence of Mayan-like civilizations, building pyramids. I mean, look at huge cities have emerged out of the jungles of the Yucatan and the Amazon just by using LiDAR, totally upsetting the mainstream narrative. The Great Pyramid is now, it's definitely not built by Khufu. We know this for a fact at this point. And that is mainstream archaeology's own fault. They lost a piece of wood that they shouldn't have lost. Then they find the piece of wood hidden in a museum, of course. Then they carbon date the thing. Turns out to be at least 200 years older than Khufu. Well, if the last time they renovated the pyramid is 200 years before the guy they said that it's named for, well, it's a cinch that the thing is definitely older than Khufu, and it had nothing to do with the Khufu dynasty, which throws a wrench into the entire thing, right? Everything that they've told us about the Sphinx, about the Great Pyramids, about the little pyramids that are outside of them, what they represent is all essentially must be discarded, at least for the time being, as potentially completely wrong. Even the translations and the meaning of the translations, from the death cults to the cities of the dead, the way that they've interpreted it. I've covered it in another paper that the solar orb, every time they've called something the solar orb, we must ask, are they really talking about the Sol or Apollo, or are they really actually talking about Ra and this green dwarf star? Because the Ramsey Sleigh makes it very clear that this Lord was bright at night and was green and the Lord of diadems. That has nothing at all in common with our sun now. And the Sleigh shows the ratio of the diameter of the equator to the polar diameter is definitely not 1-to-1, but this sun's diameter, the ratio for the sun is almost exactly 1, because there's only a 10-kilometer difference in its diameters. So the evidence is right in front of them, and we're now seeing that the whole thing, that's what I want people to come away from this. the entire narrative that you were raised on in archaeology and anthropology from a child, every time you take your own children to a museum and you see them talk about Clovis first and ice bridges where people mysteriously walk across ice, risking life and limb, then across mountains, which are, of course, going to be covered with ice, but for some reason aren't covered with ice, according to the mainstream, and then only slowly work their way down, that is all nonsense. Most archaeologists, they've taken a poll, most archaeologists do not even believe it because the data is no longer matching it. We have the internet now, and we make these comparisons. And also since 2015, so many of these submerged continents and lands have arisen, like Doggerland. They've now found Friesland. They've found High Brazil. All of these have emerged. And if you have a small doubt in the mainstream, even 30, 40 years ago, and then you put all of this on, there is, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, there must be a huge, huge amount of doubt. In fact, it makes it almost laughable that a person like Michael Shermer would come on to the Joe Rogan podcast and pretend that he's a skeptic because he's not displaying anything similar to the concept of being a skeptic. In being a skeptic, you have to have all the data and see what it's casting doubt on. And what it's casting doubt on is the standard model. It's not casting doubt on anything else. I mean, just the concept of Lemuria. We know there are lemurs in Sri Lanka and there are lemurs in Madagascar. And now we find out that there is definitely a sunken land called Mauritania. If there is a sunken land called Mauritania, why is it that we cannot talk about a larger portion of it called Lemuria? People of India who purport to have a history of 60,000 years in their Brahmin traditions, why can we not give them some credence that it's possibly true, especially when submerged land bridges between Sri Lanka and India and sunken cities outside of India have appeared. Now, Dwarka is not Atlantis, but it is a sunken city. So if Dwarka is possible, how come Atlantis can't be possible?
Right. Now, do you agree that Atlantis existed at the same time as Lemuria, or did it come after?
Well, that's the other thing is a lot of these sunken lands, they do have different ages in terms of when we age them. Of course, the land is old, but I mean the sinking of the land. For example, Doggerland was sinking ever since the Younger Dryas, at least, up till 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. There were definitely people on Doggerland. It's possible that Doggerland still had a little bit above, and it was some of the mystical islands in the Arthurian tales. It's up to 3,000 years ago. Okay, that's different than Zealandia. Zealandia somewhere between 20-some thousand years ago and 40,000 years ago. So, if we were going around the star, as Sol approaches Shamash, they're not going to just run at each other, because if they had, everybody'd be dead. They spiral around each other. And as they spiral, the distances are going to change. As the distances between the two stars change, the relationship between because of the electricity is going to change. The relationship between the satellites of Shamash and the star are also going to change. As that changes, the orbital period is going to change. The conditions, the gravitic experience is going to be different. Here's another thing. It is almost sure fact that the Earth has grown since the time of the dinosaurs, at least. Absolutely. All of the edges of all the continents fit together. Not just the Pangea side. All of them fit together. And if you remove the youngest strata of crust, it's all ocean crust. When you remove it, the continents just move back together and fit just like a puzzle. So if the planet has grown three times in that period of time, that's a lot of pressure and stress on this thin veneer that is sitting atop a gyrating powerhouse of magma. And it would not be difficult to break large sections of that crust and to cause pandemonium if with little bitty changes to electricity and gravity in the environment of the plasma electromagnetic spheres. Remember that the concept of the plasma electromagnetic spheres is that we start at the core and there's these layers. There's no, the way that we view things like a billiard ball, and it just so happens that there's air above us and then the endless void above that is all wrong. Everything up there is charge and varying degrees of charge and varying densities of charge. Inside the sun's plasma sheath, there is a corona effect, and that corona effect is denser in some ways and thinner in some ways than outside the sun's effect. And then inside the Earth's atmosphere, which we now know the Earth's atmosphere extends out past the moon, there is a different plasma environment. And then when you get down into the so-called atmosphere, the gases change their behavior, and then we have weather. And then you get down to the level of the surface of the Earth, and you have completely different electrical behaviors. So these different spheres are interacting with each other at all times. That is not a woo-woo thing to say. That is a scientific fact. There is a book, Electrocurrents in Geospace and Beyond, that people can consult, put out by ATU. It is by Wiley Publishing. It is a fact that all of these spheres are existing in an electrical and magnetic relationship to each other in a circuit, like a complex circuit. And their charge relationship is variable, and it can go from anywhere from a very slow change to sudden drastic change. We're now seeing that the magnetic reversals can happen very fast within a lifetime, and maybe they could be stable for thousands of years, even hundreds of thousands of years, but they can change really fast all of a sudden. That could be the effect of changing stars, changing who you're rotating, acquiring the moon and getting rid of our 12 other satellites that were out, to just the changes that are inherent to the convection system inside the Earth. The chaos of all this defies perfect knowledge.
If there were planets that were closer even, I would think it would be even more dramatic.
Yes, and when we talk about the breakup of Shamash, remember when it first split, yes, it formed Saturn and Jupiter, and they were locked together, and Zeus and Hera were like husband and wife. They were very close to each other. But then Hera gives birth, and more, or Kronos in this case, Kronos gives birth to Poseidon. It becomes Hera later on, after, of course, it's emasculated, right? But when it gives birth to the Poseidon, now you have a three-body problem. And a three-body problem is a chaotic system. And if we are in between the grips of three different gas giants, at least until Uranus comes along, it's going to be a difficult situation. And it's going to be for a human kind of stable, because the periods of times are still, we're talking hundreds and thousands of years. But in geological time, it's essentially pure chaos. It's just the same as the breaking of the set of billiards. When you first hit the cue ball, and when it hits, boom! Now all of this changes really rapidly, and everything's bouncing around. That's essentially what we're talking about. In some cases, actual collisions, but most cases not, probably because of some magnetic phase locking. Gareth from See the Pattern sent me a video that showed there is a way to rotate magnets fast enough to create phase locking as if you have superconductivity. And it's quite possible that that's in play in determining, we would need to calculate it and the gravity and the momentum, the angular momentum, all together to have a realistic concept of what is happening in the creation of orbits, because the magnetism is not trivial. Now, some of the magnetism, like Mars's magnetic field, is not very strong, but the sun is dominant no matter what. So but in the presence, if you're close enough to Jupiter, that magnetosphere is powerful. I think it was when I last looked at it, it's like 10,000 times the strength of the Earth's magnetic field, and it's very large too. The Jupiter's magnetosphere is the size of the sun. So if you're close enough to that, that is, whether you're moving towards or away, in conjunction with these other gas bodies that you are orbiting and worshiping as your god as they move about the sky, impressing you, it's going to be a non-trivial effect on the ground.
All right, we're 1 hour in. I thought I'd stop. I have a few people in the chat room here. How's everybody doing? We got a few in here. Can you guys hear me?
Just me, Greg.
Oh, it's just you? Oh, okay. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay. How you doing, Rick?
I'm good.
I always want to call you Shockwave.
Call me Shockwave. Just don't call me an a-hole.
Right. Well, I would never, ever do that. A-hole. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, let's see who's out there.
You know,
we got,
even though I am one, but
No, you're not.
Everybody's got one. Come on.
You're a good guy.
Everybody's one. Everybody's got one.
We got Beatles Eternally. All right, hello Beatles. We got Ray Carr. That's Ramon right there. SRC. How you doing, Ramon? You still here? Good show, man. You're doing a great job.
Ramon, get your butt into the Discord. Come on, chat with us.
American Ryan in North Carolina. Hello, Ryan. Thank you. Strange days. Strange days indeed.
Keep naming them off, dude. You miss people. Come on.
Sean Hammer. Go ahead. Come on. Help me out here. I have a hard enough time talking. Nick Sweeney. Rutger Sturm.
Robert Diggins just showed up.
Robert Diggins, howdy. And there's Ramon. Come on in the chat room, Ramon. Can't you come in here to Discord? You want to invite?
Slightly slanted sleuth for truth.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Sean Hammer.
All the old goodies, the oldies and goodies. Let me see. I'm gonna do a link here in chat.
Nick Sweeney.
I have to change it though to never.
Nathan Hunt.
Nathan. Yeah,
Renegade's here. He's a good guy.
Nathan Hunt. There is the link. Tekla. Hello from Sweden.
Strange Diaz.
Okay, I will say it already. Jimmy from Brightside. I think it is.
Yeah. Bright Insight.
Tuning in from Bangkok. How about that? That is cool. Brandy. Grouch. There he is. All right. Well,
The sacred thing about geometry is its fractal nature.
Does anyone have anything to say about the show? Any questions? Or Ramon is out there, so feel free to ask him. If you have a question, maybe put it in caps or something so I can see it. And I'll just keep going then. You guys want to move on to part 2?
Da, comrade.
Good night, SRC. All right. We're going to kick it on to part 2. I just wanted to say...
See you, Raymond.
Ray Carr, Brandy, American, Strange Days. I think I got everybody. All right.
Grouch just showed up, so...
Yep, Grouch. It's my buddy. He's in here. He'll be speaking in a little bit. Ray Carr. All right. Holloway. Good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you. Robert Diggins. Excellent. All right, here we go. Part 2. I'll be in chat from time to time as Nathan Hunt. Okay.
Leroy.
I got to get the screen back. Where is it? Is it this one? Yes. Atlantis with Ramon. Okay, here we go for hour 2. We'll break again at the end of the second hour.
There's going to be aurora. There's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be thunderbolts.
Talk to you later,
There's
Rick.
going to be weather shifts. There's going to be the decline of entire climate regions, like in the Sahara. You're going to have the collapse of species when major events come by. It will be a far and enough reason for anyone without language, doesn't matter, who's following the game to move about the planet and establish themselves in far-flung places, from Australia and New Zealand all the way to the tips of South America, because they had every reason to move. They had to follow where the resources were and where the catastrophes were not. I mean, think about it, everybody in the Sahara, whoever was there when these giant Great Lakes were buried in sand, they could no longer survive there. They had to leave. Whenever the Mediterranean filled up, those people had to leave. When the Caspian Sea filled up, the Black Sea, when the Black Sea filled up, they had to leave. And all of these so-called sunken lands really represent the truth of the Atlantean age, regardless of whether or not there is a physical Atlantis. But I do believe that there is a physical Atlantis because all the other facts support it. If all the other facts support it, well, as they say, where there's smoke, there is fire.
Excellent.
Now, there was another mechanism to describe how to explain this. So if the center of the Earth is a heavy water, meaning this form of water that we have found at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, it's toxic water. It's obviously, you can't drink it, you can't live off of it, right? It's a dead zone, they call it. They've found these oceans of water. They call it water because they didn't drill to it. They don't have a sample. They're basing it off of the velocity of sound of waves, right? Seismic waves going through the oceans of the so-called oceans of water inside the mantle. And there's, by the way, now more. They even think that there's some. This is coming out from them this year. They think that there is water like this even in the core, or that the core has a complex structure. Now, if this water is significantly dense, there is a strong possibility that it could be catching neutrinos or some form of ether, whatever you call your ether. You know, for the astronomers, their ether is space-time, but for us, it's charge. And if the charge is represented by a neutrino, so be it. So if it's catching these neutrinos into the core, it wouldn't in a human time period, but over the long enough period of time, there would be a gradual expansion effect. So now there would be the growth aspect, but the expansion effect, this creates a situation of tension in the crust. And when you have this tension, it is also another sense that there is going to be sudden bursting at the seams. And one of the most typical cases is the study, not of the Atlantic, mid-Atlantic Ocean ridge, but the Pacific, because the Pacific one is producing more new crust volumetrically and surface area-wise than there are equivalent subduction zones on the opposite side of the Pacific to consume said matter. So the Pacific Ocean is spreading faster wide than is being buried underneath. Now,
does the Pacific have a Bermuda Triangle?
Oh, I'm sure that it does. I mean, there are anomalies. You know, they've done studies on the Bermuda Triangle thing. There are enough, reefs and fog conditions there that there is undoubtedly the conditions to create catastrophic situations for people. Now, the Chinese have a different way of looking at the metaphysics and physics of the universe. And the way they see it is that there are places in feng shui where chaos emerges spontaneously. And there are places where order is created, and that's of course where you want to live in feng shui, right? You don't want to live in the foggy valley with all the headstones, and that's where disease would appear. And you live there, and everybody in the family ends up deformed, and bad luck, and people get murdered and they die. The Chinese, they figured all this out all on their own. They noticed that violent places tend to be mountainous places, and this is true. In fact, I wrote about it in another paper on boxing out hypermasculinity, that most of the oldest cultures that have the best recordings and memories of the ancient days are also very violent and hypermasculine places. Which is an interesting effect. Again, that goes back to the concept of evolution, the edge of survival. So if there are places where order tends to appear, I think it makes common sense that there are places where chaos is going to appear, and there may be gyres of energy, there may be magnetic gyres, there may be wind changes, maybe it has to do with, but these would not be only in a place like the Bermuda Triangle, it would be all over the planet. Having done enough driving through this state here and around the country, and feeling the different energy effects of different locations, I can tell you there are places you don't want to live just because the energy that you feel when you go there is negative. And then there are places where you definitely want to stop. So the feng shui is a real phenomena. Of course, feng meaning wind and shui meaning water, but what they're really describing is energy circulation. So these energy pools on the earth, we can sense them and we can feel them. And you can even measure them with electromagnetometers. And I've done that in a separate paper. I did an Indian mound here in my city, and found most definite signs of electromagnetic behavior at the hinge mouth of the C hinge But anyways, we're off the. So if there is this pressure buildup, and you have this spreading of the Pacific plate at an accelerating rate, and these plates are actually bumping against each other, according to mainstream geology. They have a velocity that can be measured, and they have vector changes that we have measured. The last time we measured it, it went this way, and now it's going almost 180 degrees the opposite direction. Well, how could it do that in such a short period of time? Well, almost assuredly, they're bumping into each other. As they're spreading, it's creating essentially a billiard ball, like a chaotic situation where they're bouncing, and you're getting rubbing of the plates, you're getting subduction happening in some of the plates, you're getting a buildup of tension between the plates, and then sudden slippage. And a good example of that will be whenever it happens, the Olympic plate in the Northwest. It's going to far dwarf in catastrophe anything the San Andreas will do, because it is going to produce almost certainly it's going to produce mega tsunamis that will go up the Puget Sound and absolutely destroy anybody and anything living in that area. I have no idea when that will happen, but the pressure that's building up is an extreme level of pressure. Now, as these are bouncing around and they're running into each other, well, what happens when things that are hard collide? They crack. And when they crack and they form faults, those faults sometimes could give way. And if you combine that with now the buckling pressure of changes of magma underneath and electromagnetic environment above, tell me how it is impossible that an entire region can sink. And now we have the locations, and we've seen that they have sunk. It's not a question of if, it's a question of where. And the Azores did sink. I don't know if the Bimini Rose sank in that dramatic kind of fashion, but it definitely sank in at least a atoll or key sort of way. If you look on page 34, there is a good a map that puts in perspective the kind of size we're talking about for the Azorian. And described, he doesn't say there's an island a little bit past the Pillars of Gibraltar. He doesn't say there's an island, it might be still in Africa. Or there's an island and it's all the way across an ocean in another world. He says that it's 3 days journey out past. And what do we see? There's an entire plateau out there. And this plateau has definitely sank beneath the ocean waves. There are only remnant islands. This is a scientific known fact.
Yeah.
So the simplest thing to me would be to say, well, we should look there. The reason they haven't, Jay, the only reason they haven't is that it's so deep, it's cost prohibitive. No one will fund a project like that because there's not a whole lot of James Camerons out in the world. And James Cameron had a reason to be interested in the Titanic. He doesn't have a lot of reason to go searching an entire plateau. I mean, look at this region. It's a large region. It's almost the size of Spain here.
Yeah.
So needle in a haystack. They don't know where to begin. It's so much easier to go to a place like the Bimini Row, and if you can give yourself an excuse to go on vacation and scuba dive down in Florida or in the Bahamas, and tell yourself you're looking for Atlantis, you'll find all sorts of things to confirm your personal pet theory. Or if you like going to Japan, there's a sunken ruins there. There are sunken lands all over the place. People could use Friesland if they like. They can use Doggerland if they like. They can find it anywhere they like. But the reason that Santorini, that's the big one, right? Santorini fits none of the description. None of the description from Plato. So it's definitely not Atlantis. And it sank only, there's actual civilization. We have found lost civilization there of the Minoans. We know when it sank, know when this happened. It is not old enough to be Atlantis. But yet people make it their personal pet theory to chase Santorini as Atlantis. It is not Atlantis. It doesn't fit the description. The reason why we don't invest major money into the Azores is it's simply too deep and there's simply too much area for us to go down. And that's the bottom line as to why we're not finding Atlantis, as far as I'm concerned. Could it be an archetype? Yes, it could be.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What do you make of Edgar Casey's prophecies?
I love him on account of, he said that a town near me called Berea, Kentucky, would survive the next deluge. However, I don't place any scientific value in his work. It doesn't mean I don't like it. I just don't place any scientific value in his work. Anyone who starts with a pseudoscientific hypothesis and then works their way to a final conclusion is no different than Lestrade arguing with Sherlock Holmes. There's a couple of the stories in Sherlock Holmes where Lestrade nearly has an innocent person jailed or even executed because of his personal pet theory and that his theory, as Sherlock would say it, he put theory before facts and would make the theory to suit the facts or the facts to suit the theory instead of the theory to suit the fact. That is a huge problem in all the alt stream and the mainstream. You have to start with the facts. And there are no facts when you talk about psychic readings. Right. I have psychic friends, but they're not scientific facts. They're inductive knowledge. And inductive knowledge is huge value to scientific progress, huge value. But they also can be frequently wrong. I think one of the best cases of this is that string theory was turned into M theory through an act of pure, I forget his name, but he woke up in the middle of the night and had a sudden solution as to how to fix all the various forms of string theory and to create and then he spent the next 20 years, that was his career, okay, and it's beautiful and elegant, and then we launched the Large Hadron Collider and completely debunked supersymmetry. You never heard about it after 2015. No one is talking about Susie anymore. Susie is gone. Why? And quietly gone too.
Yeah.
Well, it is what do they like to say, essentially it's been pushed out. It's flat out just not proven anything correct. So again, was it valuable that he had that intuition? Yes, I think that is a value as a human, but it wasn't scientifically valuable. Gotcha. And so I don't have anything against Edgar Casey. I just don't think that is a valid basis. You start with the evidence and you go with all of the facts. So let's apply that to the eye of the Rakat. At first glance, I have to admit that the theory that the eye of the Rakat has a lot of support. Number one, there's the Atlas Mountains. Number two, you got these fluvial signs in the Sahara that look like it could have been wiped off. You got the whale bones in the desert. You got look like concentric rings. You have the possibility that the Straits of Gibraltar are mislabeled. Okay, all right, that's fine.
There's no.
If you take a look, there's none. No. First of all, which could have been wiped out by a mega tsunami, right? The description is that the island went down in a day and a night, not in a single wave. Secondly, the eye of the Rakat is located in a geology stratum that has never, ever been below the sea level that we are aware of in the last million years. It's just not. It's always been above the sea level. And back in the day, remember, during the Younger Dryas, the sea level was even lower, not higher, right? So it was even further from the ocean before than it is now. Next of all, the so-called concentric rings, which are concentric for a reason. They're concentric because it's a thunderbolt site, but they're not symmetric and they're broken. They would never have held any amount of canal water, and they don't match the description of in Plato's work. They don't match the description of how many rings there would be. Finally, and this is the killer, aside from not having the mountains to the north, the actual eye of the Rakat sits on an incline. So if there were water in the eye, it would have poured out, which is probably why there isn't any currently there. It was not level. They've never found anything. The whale bones themselves came from the mega tsunami of the fluvial, dumping the whale bones and other things, sharks and fish, into the Sahara Desert. So there are these bones throughout. Anywhere that there's a fluvial pattern, if you want to pull up the Google Earth for people to show them, you can see when you look at Tunisia and Mauritania and Algeria, you could see these giant fluvial patterns. There's going to be whale bones all throughout all that. If we ever get a chance, because it's hopefully no longer a war-torn place, to actually go and excavate, they're never going to find a scintilla of evidence that the eye of the Rakat was ever Atlantis, because it wasn't. That does not mean, however, there wasn't Atlantean age civilizations throughout the Sahara. Almost certainly there was.
It looks like the familiar target, like a Birkeland current.
Yes, and it probably was a Birkeland current, and it probably was formed not even that long ago, whenever the body that dumped all that sand came by, because the sand did not come out of the ground. That sand came from elsewhere.
You can see it almost from space.
Yeah, and can you see the fluvial pattern?
Yes.
Where it looks like the ocean came in from the Mediterranean, flowed across Africa, and then dumped back out into the Atlantic. And that's probably exactly what happened. But that does not mean that the Eye of the Raquette was a city that was, destroyed or over flooded. None of the other facts support the theory. It's a fun theory, but once again, when people are sure that they have an answer, they want to say this is the answer before going and finding the facts. I cannot say the Azores is Atlantis. I can say, though, it fits the vast majority of the facts, and we have not spent the money to go and explore enough of it to disprove, right? And that's really the issue. So if anybody's listening out there and you're wealthy or independently rich, or you want to make finding Atlantis your big thing, focus on the Azores, which is a large enough area, that entire triangle, to go. One of the big keys that it probably is on that side of things, and not on the Santorini side, is my own people, the Basque people, have DNA that does not match the rest of the European flow of mDNA. The question is, where did they come from? And one of the theories is they possibly were survivors from the Atlantean submersion. And if these people did go all over the place, maybe Casey's right, maybe they became the Algonquin people. But again, that isn't a scientific method. You have to actually measure things and then go and look. There's a picture of the hotspots of the world on the next page, on page 35. And you can see, guess what? There's a hotspot at the Azores. So when we talk about the uplift, the buckling, and then the potential sudden collapse, the unexpected decade, which again, for us, only takes a few thousand feet. Geologically speaking, that's nothing for the crust to buckle. I mean, very little. In the case of the Azores, I mean, it's kilometers, but for us as humans, if you're living in Miami right now, and Miami suddenly sinks 100 feet, it is a disaster. It is a Atlantean disaster. Do you see the hot spots?
Oh yeah. Are they the dots?
Yeah. Yeah. And you look, and there's one there, also down there in the Mauritania. Right, and then also in the Kerguelen, which is another sunken land, but it's millions of years ago, as far as we can tell. So these various hotspots can represent places where there is sudden change in the behavior of the crust. Now, as to the why, that's where the mainstream and the alt-stream are going to disagree. There's a more close-up zoom of the Azorean Plateau on the following page, on page 36. Of course, I talked about the Piri-Reis map. It's just one of those anomalies that shows that people knew more than we imagined. And the Amazonians probably were a lost civilization. If you go to page 40, a couple of other interesting facts, you can see how much land used to exist in the not too distant past that humans would have had availability to. That's going to lend credence to lost land tales around the world.
Yeah, I forgot about that thing.
Then you have the Dona Ana Park, from in Spain, but I've not heard that they've ever found anything major, that's come of that. We get to, on page, what is that, page 41, continue with Critias, many great deluge has taken place during the 9,000 years, which is, of course, 3,000 years ago since this was written.
Pretty good.
With time, as I was speaking, during this time, through so many ages, never been any considerable accumulation of soil coming down from mountains. It's another place of the earth has fallen away all around and sunk out of sight. That's pretty accurate. When you look at around the world, when you go back to page 40, that looks a lot like a lot of land that has suddenly shrunk away. So that lends, again, credence to Plato's writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing. How believable is Plato, who is in the Egyptian priest?
Right.
The next page, 42, High Brazil. High Brazil has been confirmed. Since this paper was written, they do know that is High Brazil for sure. So if it can fall beneath the waves in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, why couldn't Atlantis?
Mm-hmm.
We came into this being skeptical that Atlantis was anything more than a mythical archetype, or let's beware that the science itself, the mainstream science, has changed. It's not just about people selling books at seminars anymore, or financing their scuba diving down in Florida. This is serious business of finding lands that used to belong to humans. And these are mostly people that are gone now. There could be entire tribes that we've never heard their name, a bit of language we know nothing about their culture, and we have found not even a shard of pottery to represent them, that have come and gone from locations like this.
Hello? Ramon, are you back?
Back, yeah. I had a phone call.
Oh, all right. I thought it was me. All right, go ahead.
So that's more or less my pitch. That people, they can go through the paper. Obviously, they can go through the different references. What do I got here? It's not a trivial amount of references. Over 100. Let's see, 119 references. If you want to take a look, I have the stones in the appendix there on page 54. I have their tonnage, their length, width, depth. And then on the final page there at page 56, I have their rough period of time and when they were being made. And the period, according to my schema that I put forth first in the on the origins of religions. By the way, the schema I put forth as far as an extended timeline has worked out very well, and it was maybe a flash of brilliance. But these periods, starting with the Atlantean period, and then going into the Tepe period, then the Archaic period, then the Megalithic period, then the Transition period, the Religious period, the Scientific period, have actually been very useful for describing a lot of the phase changes of the solar system. They don't match up exactly with what I had written down, because more data emerges. It's become very clear that the 7,000 year ago boundary is related to us becoming a satellite of Jupiter. I didn't know that at the time that I had written on the origins of religion. So some of these period colorations may be off since I wrote this paper, but the data on the previous pages of 54 and 55 is completely accurate. Look at the weight of some of these stones. There is no reasonable way to describe why anybody would make stones this large unless they had a good reason to believe they could actually move it, right? Why would they spend the calories? Unless it's a really strange form of punishment. They wouldn't have if they didn't expect that they would be capable of actually physically moving these stones. And the only reason they would be capable of doing that is if we had a change in gravitic circumstances. And it is not true that the oldest stones are the largest stones. That is not true. The largest stones definitely are in the megalithic period, from the megalithic to the early transition period. The oldest stones are going to come from more like the Archaic period, and they were big, but they weren't as big. So that describes to me a change in the environment. If there's a change in the environment, again, there could have been a change in the crust because the force is applying everywhere. If there's a change in the crust,
giants.
Well, how would I know? Because we never found any.
Would it make more sense?
Again, I mean, the thing is, we don't know when the biggest growth periods happened, because the mainstream geology has gone through mapping the plate tectonics from a biased standpoint. They started with the assumption, because of a long-held debate covered in When the Earth Nearly Died. He covers it pretty well. This long-held debate back in the 1800s, in which the uniformitarians won because Christianity was under assault because of Darwin and evolution. Because Darwin and evolution began winning, even though Darwin himself was Christian, the story became that the deluge was impossible, and that the earth must be billions of years, first millions, then billions of years old. I'm not saying it's not, but I am saying that catastrophe should never have been lost, and that there is plenty of evidence for the deluge and for the floods and for other catastrophes. And so because they started with that premise, they always assume, even when they come to a realization that the crust has changed in a catastrophic way, it always happened hundreds of millions of years ago. I don't know if you know that. It's always at least hundreds of years ago.
I know. Yeah.
There's no way of knowing when the growth happened, because they're going into it with these biases. They're looking, now I saw on the Ancient Architects channel, they're now looking at these samples from, Greenland, and they're finding plant matter in the layers of times when they said that there was definitely already ice. Mm-hmm. So how could there be forests? Because there were forests only a few thousand years ago on Greenland, when it was, again, in the southern hemisphere instead of in the northern hemisphere. And I'm not saying that the island itself moved. I'm saying that the whole planet turned over. And if the whole planet can turn over, my God, what else could happen? Right? The crust itself could have, if the inside of the orange turns and there's nothing holding, if there's no roots holding the peel, well, as it turns over, there's going to be a shift in the crust too. And it's all going to bounce around. It's going to be quite a mess, geologically speaking.
Wouldn't you agree, though, it would almost take an extraterrestrial influence to cause something like that?
No. Well, extraterrestrial meaning larger than Earth,
or a body, another body,
Yeah, undoubtedly. And it's not even hard. We wouldn't have to have gotten that close to Neptune, because Neptune at the time, according to the Ramayana, the monster that was subdued by Rama and Lakshmana was throwing out these giant thunderbolts and was a raging beast. And then when you talk about Jupiter, the thunderbolts that came from Jupiter, they shook the ground. We know that from the Chinese glyphs all the way over to the the behavior or the writings over in the Middle East and in the West. So they physically shook the ground. If they physically shook the ground, there's a good chance that they were buckling the ground. I think Velikovsky is probably correct that Venus lifted up the Red Sea. And if Venus can lift up the Red Sea, what could a planet the size of Jupiter or Neptune do?
Degrassi
and then, of course, you talk about the...
Degrassi says the entire southern hemisphere was lifted off the ground.
Well, I mean, I have no way of knowing.
Imagine that. But you know what? That would be what a planet would do with the charge it has.
Yeah. Huge power. It wouldn't even be that difficult. Around this planet in any given day is between 150,000 and 600,000 amps.
Yep.
And that's to say nothing of when they detect, space hurricanes. This is the new thing now, space hurricanes.
Yes.
Going on in the well, the amount of current that's happening in those space hurricanes is probably in the millions of amps.
I'm going to do it.
And millions of amps is a huge amount of power.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I forget what a lightning bolt is. I have it in a tape. I have a whole table of the power. but lightning bolt is a lot of amps, and we're way beyond the lightning bolt, way beyond the lightning bolt. Yeah. And it's just it's a scaling power. So when you get to 10 to the 6, 10 to the up to 10 to the 8 amps of electricity,
mega lightning.
Yeah, but the actual force effect is going to seem really infinitely more powerful than even a thunderstorm, which frightens people to this day. I mean, when you see a really good thunderstorm, of course, it's very exciting and interesting, but it's also terrifying.
I love it.
That kind of power is trivial compared to the power that generated not only from the internal pressures of the Earth, like creating Tamil Massive, but the external thunderbolt pressures that would create things like Barringer Crater, or the Grand Canyon, or the Knobs of Kentucky, or Ayers Rock. Those powers, whether they were primal back in the day of the formation of the planet, or more recently when it was the smaller planets that came near and shocked the Earth, it's still infinitely more powerful compared to, and the people at the time. Let's say that they were living in the time of Venus coming by, or Mars. They would have only ever heard the stories about Zeus. They would have never personally witnessed it. And the people who were in the time of Zeus would have never experienced anything from the time of Poseidon, or the time of when Kronos was the original, or Shamash, or Zervan, however you want to name the star, and the kind of power that they witnessed in the Younger Dryas. It's really a cinch to have an extinction event. Very simple.
Yeah, it's obviously happened more than once on the Earth.
Oh, clearly.
That would be horrible.
In light of all this, I don't see why anyone would listen to a naysayer like Michael Sherman, or anyone else who pretends to be a real skeptic, because a real skeptic asks questions. They don't just inject doubt. The entire purpose of science is to ask a question, form a hypothesis, and then go and observe the data. The data has come back. There are definitely some land. We're all over this planet, period.
Yeah, skeptics.
Göbekli Tepe proved there's no room in the future science for people like Zahi Hawass, because Zahi Hawass didn't even know about Göbekli Tepe, and then he dared to debate Graham. He didn't even know about Göbekli Tepe.
No,
so
I know.
How could he possibly any answers?
No, the guy's he's just mainstreamed out, He believes what he wants, but he's not in power anymore. He's been out of power for quite a while.
No, he's back in power.
He's back in power? Oh, my. He was corrupt. They ran him out of Egypt. Now he's
very corrupt. Yeah, well, that's what the corruption can do for you, I guess. We live in a corrupt time and a ever-corrupting place. And by the way, and just as a public service announcement, let me say, I hope your listeners are now fully convinced that they can toss aside the standard model and begin searching in earnest. I hope they also go to my papers, the EPMC papers, and read, starting with On the Origins of Religion, go into the Atlantis paper, go into Plasma Electromagnetic Sky, go into the Megafauna Extinction. These are long papers. Go into Magnetic Universe Theory, and then from there, of course, all the other interesting things. And then they will have a fairly good grasp of the next paradigm of science.
Oh, yeah. I think it's pretty safe to say everyone watching this channel has already discarded mainstream.
Well, I'd say it's probably pretty safe to say. However, I'd like them to coast to safe shores as well. The reason why I put so many citations in my paper, of course, to provide a backbone, and B, because good science means you can repeat it. You can go and look up the information. You can decide for yourself how believable the information. I apologize if any of the YouTube links turn out to be gone. I can't do anything about that. But at least they've provided. And
I'll put in
the
the
work
description.
remains there.
Whatever you want me
thank
to,
you.
And what I think is, to me, it's huge that we have a researcher that is an advocate for the electric universe. That's not very common.
No, it's not. It's not
rare,
common, unfortunately.
A true
I
find.
wish that my friend Gareth would write papers, but he makes great videos over at See the Pattern. They're wonderful videos, and he goes through the science, and he finds really important alternative science from the 20th century, mostly,
cool.
from the plasma and electromagnetic scene. But the difference is, Greg, is that here, especially if people go and read magnetic universe theory paper, I debunk the idea that we need to divide it all up. You got the electric people, you got the magnetic people, and you got the plasma people. That's the wrong idea.
It is
all one thing.
Right.
It's one thing. Why it's called plasma electromagnetism. The PIM, I call it, the PIM is the unified ether force we've been looking for. The PIM is the UAF. And the reason why I say it's the UAF is very simply, electromagnetic waves do not need, so far that we know, any other ether to propagate themselves. That's a good indication that electromagnetism is the ether that we were already looking for. And so talk about the sea of charge. The sea of charge is probably the ether. And what do we find now? Since I created plasma electromagnetic cosmology as an open source cosmology that anyone listening can go and do their own plasma electromagnetic cosmology work or extended plasma electromagnetic cosmology work, such as Atlantis. Atlantis is an extended concept. But ever since then, they've been discovering all this space dust. They found out half of the dark matter. They found all the missing baryons. Why? Because there are charges everywhere. Everything is charged all over the place. They measure all these subatomic particles in electron volts. This is the big lie that is out there, that everything is gravity, that light is a particle, all this stuff. And it's not based on any rigorous philosophical background. And so with plasma electromagnetic cosmology, we create the background in an open source way. We cite standard model, we cite alt stream, we bring it all together. And then when you talk about extended, if you have an extension concept, whether it's psychological or biological or economic, militaristic concept, and it ties back to the plasma electromagnetic cosmology as long as there's evidence. When I compared the Chinese sciences to plasma electromagnetic cosmology, there was huge concordance between the two, but not 100%. But there was more than with the ancient alien hypothesis, which is saying something really important. Because the plasma electromagnetic cosmology keeps making good predictions. And it's making those predictions because it's coming from a unified place, an integration. There is no magnetism without the electricity, and there's no electricity without the magnetism. We've got to get away from that. It's one of those unfortunate legacies of magnetohydrodynamics. But it'll all get unified eventually, mathematically. Of course, that's not the point. Math is just a tool. The real issue is if we can mentally do it instead of continuously dividing. Right now, superconductivity is not mentioned in the same breath as cavitation, and cavitation is not mentioned in the same breath as Bose-Einstein condensates, and Bose-Einstein condensates are not mentioned in the same breath as optics. Why is that? And especially in a world where supposedly optics are being affected by gravity, I'd like to know exactly how that's supposed to be a real phenomena. I can get that they have the tensor mathematics to prove it, but when you go back and you look at the history, gravity waves were predicted and by the same guy who was the one who created relativity theory, which was Henri Poincaré. not Einstein. So if Einstein had done his tensor equation using Maxwell instead of Newton, he probably would have ended up in the same excellent place of prediction, but with better values. And he probably would have been able to see all the expansion and contraction issues and all that that's come about. I'm not a mathematical expert. I can make no claims to understanding tensors, but it is a cinch that if the guy who came up with relativity theory was doing transformations of Maxwell's equations when he came up with it, that's probably that's where he came up with relativity. That's probably a good indicator that general relativity always should have been based on electromagnetic theory from the 1880s up until the quantum period. And then quantum and relativity theory would have never been separated, because quantum theory has always been connected. And Einstein, he got his Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect. And I emphasize the electric part of that, the photoelectric effect. And it somehow missed that the two are connected, and that possibly gravity is really just as Wall says, the ashes of electrical systems. Possibly. Until we unite it, we can't say it for sure. But it seems very, very likely. And if that is true, well, now the Atlantean story takes on a whole profound new experience. There should be movies about this. There should be epic trilogies and Lord of the Rings style with graphics and everything about what happened, because there was the star breaking up and the lands were shifting and all those biblical things. And imagine the power that would have on the spirit of people, giving them hope, bringing them back to goodness instead of living hedonistic and materialistic, pointless existences. That's one of the big things about on the origins of religions, is getting people to realize that religion was not a bad thing. It was a reaction to the bad. Right? And I had to set forth the time period in there in order to enable us to play. It's a false dichotomy where you have creationists needing everything to happen in the last 5,000 to 6,000 years, and then the mainstreamers needing everything to happen somehow only before the dinosaurs and nothing ever since. Oh, except for the Ice Age. Well, why did that Ice Age happen? They don't have a reason. They don't know. We have a hypothesis. We can move with that hypothesis. Changes in orbit, changes in the star, changes in our solar system, right. Big things that formed who we are as a people. Why did we do what we did? Why are we so messed up? Like, Velikovsky covers. What is it that made us want to create symbols and language? These things matter.
Well, look at us now. We're building weapons like mad. We're creating fear and mistrust. We should be coming together. I mean, what's going on? I mean, we're headed for destruction.
We spend billions of dollars to watch Venus get blown up in every other Star Wars. That is a really weird form of therapy. But it worked. In 1977, it was a huge deal. Everyone got to watch, who wanted to, got to watch Venus blow up. And boy, it was so great. We did it again in the third film. And then Disney got a hold of it, and they were like, you know what? That's so great. Let's do it some more. Let's blow up Venus. How many times we got to blow up Venus before we feel better? I hope that we get it done before we blow ourselves up, because we have created all these weapons of the gods and then pointed them at each other.
Yeah.
It's a terrible mistake.
If you press the button, you're committing suicide. There's not going to be a winner.
Well, of course.
You're just going to mass murder.
And the irony is the weapon of the gods that we've made is, of course, trivial compared to the actual 7 weapons of the gods. This paper, I cover the names of these weapons. I cover the names of the gods. I cover, rough correspondence. Now, bear in mind, again, when I wrote on the origins of religions, I only had Wall Thornhill's proto-Saturn theory, but I did not have proof of Shamash physically tearing them into pieces and seeding multiple planets. I didn't have that, right? It did a great job. I mean, those guys, they built on Velikovsky. They built on, from the 1800s and the early 1900s. We've come a long ways. But now with the internet, we are getting data so quick. Actually, to be honest, I can't even do enough EPMC research. It would need to be a full-time job, and I probably can't even get paid for it. Keep up with what's coming out now.
I don't think there's anyone that I agree with 100% on. That's just going to be natural.
Well, yeah, and Joseph Campbell wasn't exactly wrong. He just wasn't exactly right. Neither was Carl Jung.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're 100% wrong, because, of course, things like the Eye of Horus have metaphysical. They have double meaning.
Yes.
The Eye of Horus on in the New Kingdoms definitely does relate to the pineal gland, but it didn't originally.
Right.
Originally, the Eye of Horus specifically referred to the Great Red Spot. So, we have to take into account all the data. If people are wondering, I have the mathematical proof that we saw the northern hemisphere of the Earth saw the northern pole of Jupiter. We know this now because it's in the mounds, and it's mathematically proven that it is non-coincidental. There is a 0% chance of coincidence. It's like 1/4 times 10 to the 54 or something like that chance of coincidence of those sites. In which case, that opens up by itself huge issues in the human timeline, both in the mainstream and the alt stream. Any alt stream, because no one hardly was talking. There it is right there. Those mounds, those dots, and then you scroll down, and there's the North Pole of Jupiter. That is we've only been there since 2017. That's when the scan was taken. And after that was taken, in 2019, when things started to get crazy, COVID-19, when it first began, maybe the New World Order knew this, I don't know. But the South Pole of Jupiter turned from a pentagon or pentacle into a hexagon because it reconnected to Saturn because of the conjunction that was coming up in 2020. So the changes are happening now. They're not only in the past, they're happening now. And the things that we can measure.
Yes, yeah. It's always changing. Yeah. It's fluid.
Yes, it's always doing really interesting things.
We're in motion. The great man killing the animals with plasma streamer, thunderbolts of the gods.
Yeah, originally, the creationists thought that was a pterodactyl and a man, in the same scene, and then the archaeologists they thought something completely different. Then they cleaned it up, and it all turned out to be plasma glyphs, except for the little actual animals over there on the left. So you got the comet Venus, and you've got the exploding. You got the star stretching and exploding its energy, and you've got the two coming together and forming the plasma sphere, and you got the thunderbolts coming down.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful example of the plasma glyphs. But what I love about the story again is that the creationist said one thing, the archaeologist said another thing, and it turned out both were not exactly correct.
It's
great
amazing
example of plasma technology. Go ahead.
It's amazing that these ancient peoples felt so compelled to create all of this art.
Well, I mean, you say that, but for much less, I feel compelled to be spiritual. I mean, I might see a hawk on a, or two hawks on a telephone pole next to each other, and I'm already thinking symbolically and deeply. We are now hardwired to think symbolically. We can't help it. We can't turn it off.
Oops.
It is now ingrained into us to the point where we have meme culture, because the need to communicate through the symbology has become an absolute part of our cultural DNA.
Oh yeah, but it's beginning to be now where you can't even have debate in a democratic society or they get rid of you. What's up with that?
Now that would be the potential for talking about serious religious discussion about the advancement of evil, which could be had biblical perspective or with the Chinese, just a discussion of the changes and of the force effects and the field effects that happen, and then maybe dealing with the location, if Ben Davidson is right, the location of the solar system relative to the Milky Way, that maybe we are entering an inversion field of some kind. Of course, people say it's a kumbaya of we're going to return to feminine-led existence and everything will be great. And I'm sitting there looking at the news going, are you kidding me? Like the abolishment of fact.
We've never been closer.
And of math and calling it all racist or calling it all patriarchy is not a return to utopia. And to be honest with you, even in the Atlantean period, I would not want to live in the Atlantean period. I would have loved to have seen the star. I would have loved to have seen the star break down as long as I was safe. But I would not want to live during these times. These times were dangerous times, bloody times, disease-filled times. There is no evidence that any Atlantean people, because if it were there, it would be under the waves. But there's no evidence that they were somehow, space flying people. We don't have any of that. That's all cultural DNA. In fact, I would say it's more likely that all stems from a culture coming off of the planet Mars and coming down here to escape the destruction of Venus, and them being a different kind of human that came down here. There's more evidence for that than there is for Atlanteans themselves having flying vehicles like in the Disney film. There's no evidence for that.
No, I didn't think it had gone that far myself. But, Atlantis, it explains a lot of things, like the people coming from nowhere out of the sea to teach the people and stuff, that gives them a home, Maybe they came from Atlantis after it was destroyed.
And the Veracochans very well could have been Atlanteans. And if they were the Basque people and they became the Algonquins and all that, I could see that. I could see that. But I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying there's no evidence currently.
No. Well, they in their stories, their myths, they got paint drawings of the guys. In a lot of places down in South America, they have a bearded man.
But that could also go, Dave Talbot might be right there. That could just be a reference to the creator God. You know what I mean? That it doesn't have to.
At some point, it has to become real.
Yeah, that's true. I will tell you that I think that more likely is that based on the research that I've done, that the people that came down to the Amazonian area and would have influenced the people in the Titicaca region of Peru, that probably they came from North America and may have brought with them knowledge from as they came down North America and then came down and encountered the people in Mexico, may have brought that technology with them. And that would seem like a marvelous feat. Now, as to the race and identity of these people, I could not specify. But it's clear that the people in South America were different, and that they viewed them with reverence, and that's all that matters. Whoever they were and wherever they came from, they were viewed with reverence until they weren't, of course, as is usually.
Just
you get along with each other. The cultures get along with each other until they don't.
What if North America was Atlantis? That'd be fun.
I mean, yeah, it's a potential. It was certainly this region that I'm in here was the Avalon.
Yeah.
But
And then there's
we
California
don't.
stories too.
Yeah, yeah.
In part of
But
Lemuria.
that's because everywhere, and they're seeing the same symbols and everything because their cultural DNA is going with them.
Yeah. Yeah, the Earth is
Right?
ever changing, like you proved it is. Yeah, great talker. Is that it? Are we at the end?
Yeah, I had a really good time. Didn't hear anything from Andy.
You are like clockwork.
No,
Well.
I've sat back and enjoyed the conversation.
Do you have any questions for him? He can go, can he? I mean, he's like, you just wind him up and let him go.
The only thing I'd say, Ramon, when you look at what's going on now, it's really about the balance of power. So, like you have a big gun, I've got to have a big gun. And we assume that is a balance of power instead of working together. Who's going to be first to Mars? Instead of working together, let's get to Mars.
That got assassinated.
I have a whole opinion piece about how our Mars planning is we're getting way ahead of ourselves because of the order of scale. A lot of people bankrupted their country, and this space shuttle was mothballed in a warehouse safekeeping, and it's just all collapsed in on itself. It's really tragic considering how much engineering effort went in. We don't have a monetary system that can currently support true space exploration because we haven't engineered one because we've inherited a feudal economic system. And so what we really have
you hit the nail on the head. We have a feudal system. And while we have that, we can't work together enough to create the energy to truly do it. Because with the engineering, we need the energy, don't we?
That's right. We need as Tesla, he said, we need the human energy and momentum. And actually, I saw a disturbing report. There are too few young people being interested in STEM fields. So we're actually going backwards because the technology is able to bootstrap itself, as Wal Thornhill says. Because technology can bootstrap itself, these young people can use software to design hardware and software without having to know any of the fundamental science behind how it works. So they're getting a magical understanding of how the internet and technology works, and not getting a grasp of fundamentals and not being interested in it because they're interested in what? They're interested in media and entertainment and social media. They're interested in the instant gratification of things, TikTok and viralicity, and these other phenomena, which humans are fundamentally interested in humans. That's not a problem. It's a problem when we get too interested in each other, but that's not the problem. The problem is when we leave this planet, which is already dangerous as it is, it turns out the environment outside the planet is even more dangerous and requires an exponential amount of energy and care to engineer. I'll give you an example. To design a car is very, very difficult. You have the concept artists, you have the original prototyping engineers, you have then the systems engineers and the mechanical engineers working together to create factory systems. Then you have people doing safety and testing. Then you have the marketing people. So you have all of this, all for a car. Now that car is full of holes. It is physically incapable of even going in water, let alone going in space. And then we have this imagination, and we have really kind of like rattly looking spaceships in our movies, like in Star Wars. They just kind of like thrown together plastic, of going out in space and then having space battles. But the truth is, if we built $100 billion space cruiser, you could decrease with one single railgun shot. So you can't have space battles. You can't have space buccaneers. This whole the expanse, that whole shtick that's happening in the expanse, we can't have that because the physical cost of time and effort would bankrupt our society. We would not be able to feed ourselves. We would not have enough agriculture going on. We actually need an exponential boost in the use of aquaponic and permaculture technologies combined with computing and scaling just to create a background for the amount of people that we need to even have the engineers to create the space culture that we want to create. And then you talk about the money
system. Which means we have to get some good energy systems in place to start even supporting these, get them going. And we're still running fossil. We've just got off the horse.
Yeah, we're a lawnmower wanting to run Formula One, and that's not going to happen.
Well, we do have the TR3E.
We have the propulsion is not really as much a problem until we get to the scale, and then we get limited by we're stuck in the solar system. Then it would become a problem. The real problem is because we got electromagnetic launching systems that have been designed. We've got nanotechnologies. The real problem is the cost, because most projects fail. They either fail in venture or if they're government programs, they get down. And the fiat that funded it is wasted. And that is a huge loss in momentum and energy in the progression forward. Plus, then the people die. Who knew stuff? There are people who did the Apollo program dying.
Yeah, but the waste of the fiat comes down to, again, that power concept of the feudal system whereby I've got to maximise at potentially your expense along the way. If you understand what I mean by that. And that's really, I see, as our biggest failure today is everybody's, it's like this ultra competition instead of working together. You know, so you go back to what you said about the Russian system. If we had have totally worked together, we possibly could have achieved a lot more back then.
Right? Yeah, they could have become. They have a great space program, but let's no one kid themselves. NASA has been the major backbone of the space exploration up until very recently, and there really isn't an ability of ESA or the Chinese space program. The Chinese one, they have the money is now there, but they don't have the expertise level.
But would you not agree with me? The Chinese will soon build it if it's possible. So, I mean, they will build the expertise relatively quickly.
Yeah, they'll build. They have an issue with quality assurance because of all the need for always hurrying through things in their infrastructure. Yeah. They have an issue with the concept of in engineering, because the West has been just a little background, because I have an electrical engineering degree, but I practice Chinese medicine. So I am immersed in the Chinese sciences as well as the Western sciences. The Chinese sciences were more robust thousands of years ago, before the religious period, than they were during all of the imperial period. From the Emperor Qin to the end of the empire. The whole reason why they've abandoned the Chinese sciences in most ways is to adopt the Western science, is because of how far behind they were in that concept of empirical understanding. So the culture itself lost a belief in the objectivity that is necessary. And that objectivity, we have this Descartesian background or Aristotelian background that really goes back to Socrates, that enabled engineering to approach the sophistication, or the how would you say, the obsession with perfection that the Egyptians had. Now, no one knows why the ancient Egyptians had that obsession with the perfection of engineering, unless they were building a Giza power plant. You wouldn't need, for having a death cult, you don't need to have a perfect pyramid, right? There are plenty of pyramids around the world. None of them have the obsession with engineering that we see in the Giza Plateau. So that obsession was lost until very recently. What I'm worried about is that we're losing it again, because we've exited the Great Enlightenment is over, and it's been over for the way technology is bootstrapping itself. It seems that the only time that we perfect engineering is if there's a profit motive, and that is, I'm a capitalist, so I'm not against the profit motive, but there is something wrong with only profit motive, because the profit motive also creates the idea of programmed obsolescence. The profit motive is why we have light bulbs that go dead so quickly, when there is a light bulb that has been burning for 120 years and was designed in the late 1800s. So if we were solely interested in the perfection of engineering and in helping each other and doing what science was originally meant to do, we would get a lot further than we will with the profit motive. I don't know how to get rid of the profit motive. My solution would be, I saw somebody on TED actually propose this, that we have multiple competing economic systems of different kinds of currencies. And I guess that's where the cryptocurrency thing may be the solution. And you know, people act like it's bad for the environment. It's only bad for the environment so long as we keep, you know, burning fuel. As Tesla said, that's a barbaric way to make energy, is to burn fuel. If we produce energy the proper way, the need to actually fuel all these cryptocurrencies will lead us to the need for electricity from space, and that will help us to fuel our space exploration, because the only other way we're going to do it is through militarism, and that's not going to work, because we just simply cannot afford to have space Star Wars. We just can't. It isn't an affordable option,
and nor a humanitarian option.
Obviously, yeah. Obviously, it's not a good idea. Yeah. If you got a vessel of 10,000 women and children and species, you know, on an ark to go over to Mars, we can't have pirates. We can't have, you know, wars between nations. This is nonsense, of course. This is mental insanity. You know, we would hopefully be trying to be, you know, more of a Kryptonian, like, you know, perfection. If we can actually build an ark to move people to Mars. But I think the truth, and I have it in my other paper, the Birkeland Polyphase Superweb, that really to terraform Mars, we need to not only harness space energy, but we need to set up automated systems on Mars and on Venus and transport atmosphere from Venus back to Mars, but not by burning fuel, but it needs to be sort of happening on its own. And if we can transport that kind of atmosphere back over to Mars, then we might be able to beneficially terraform the planet at some point. And plus moving water from places like Europa to Mars. And then we could have 3 eggs instead of 1 egg in a basket. Because right now, all our eggs are in one basket, but really it's just 1 egg.
But you know, that also comes back to when you and Greg were talking earlier about the core of the Earth and, you know, the 3 probabilities. And if you look at Mars, it's got to be rebooted to get it going again.
Yep.
You get where I'm coming from? Going to take you know, like, if you sit down and think about it, you and Ramon could do a whole show on, you know, these 3 probabilities of what's the core.
Because
You know, at the end of it, that's our whole energy system through there.
I listed my objections to why, you know, us jumping into the colonized Mars thing. It's in that op-ed. We really gotta just focus on getting to the moon, which is still inside the Earth's atmosphere technically. If we could get to the moon and actually prove that we can work together as a species to get to the moon without burning fuel, we have a small chance that we could even get to Mars in the next 2 centuries and really have a good foothold. Not just a campsite, because right now that's what they're spending a lot of money to go make a campsite, because it's not reasonable to ask people to live there. They will become sick. They won't be able to have kids. If they've been there long enough, they won't be able to really live back on Earth, because their bodies will shut down. It's very, it's not a pretty situation.
And we have a senile president who's thinking about taking the world with him.
Yeah, that's another issue going on. The changes, what the Chinese would say about this, except for, may you live in interesting times, which always meant like, may you take advantage of dangerous circumstances. They would say that, we're in a transitional period, and this transitional period is formative and an unknown length of time. And I don't know when we'll have another great age of enlightenment. If we can keep this internet thing going without it devolving into memes and porn only, then we might have a chance. If we can get young people to actually care about this stuff, then we might have a chance. If it keeps devolving into WAP and TikTok,
I know,
then
it's ridiculous.
The culture that spawned the American industrial revolution of ideas and invented so many things like air conditioning and electricity and all this stuff, we'll probably have to wait to come again. And I hope it wouldn't have to wait as long as we've had to wait since ancient Egypt. But the reality is that we only seem to make rapid progress when we focus on force, the PIM. When we focus on the PIM, we thrive. Whether it was ancient Egypt or ancient China, or when the origins of religions, or the Great Enlightenment. It's when we focus on the PIM. When we're focused on the PIM, then we do better.
What is
the PIM? The plasma electromagnetic force.
Okay.
The thing that's guiding. It's all in front of you, right there. It's all in front of you. It's the origin of religion. In fact, when you go back far enough, the thunderbolt was the Lord. It wasn't just the planet. It was the weapon. The God, the force, all of it that held everything together was the Lord when you go far enough back. That doesn't replace anybody's individual spirituality in the now. I have a faith. But when we go far enough back, the PIM was the thing behind what they were seeing in Yggdrasil, in the Thunderbolt, in the planet. It was everything connecting, and that we will hearken to that as a species when it is readily seen again. That's why I advocate the polyphase superweb, that we light up the skies with this space electricity, and that we see the auroras again. It will change people. Because now the Wi-Fi and stuff, it's too easy, and it's also not correct. It's not the right form of electricity for us. It's a good intermediary stage. Tesla said that burning fuel is acceptable in a short term, but not for long term.
Mm-hmm. They got the answer right over there with that Sapphire project. If people would just pay attention to it, that might be a new way to have power plants.
Well, it's certainly a step in the right direction, but that's just a scientific experiment.
I think they're trying to market.
Well, they're doing good. They're doing good stuff in finding investors and such. But again, though, to take that from the scale that they're at to nuclear plant size,
Right,
I think
right.
that that's probably the stage after. Probably it would be better if we would start with thorium
Yeah,
and 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 various forms of turbines. I mean, waterfall turbines and river turbines and wave turbines and
right.
and geothermal. I mean, for God's sakes, where did geothermal go? There's no reason not to use geothermal energy. There's no excuse to not use geothermal energy. And then there's loads of forms of energy that we aren't capturing that we could get into. Long before we need to even harness the space energy. We would only need the kind of energy that's up in space, the kind of power that's up there for the expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And to expand onto other planets and terraform them, to remake Venus and Mars and Earth's image, to colonize Europa and Titan.
It would cost billions.
Well,
but if you have a look,
Ramon,
we're too busy building weapons.
We'd be beyond that concept. That would be the point. It would cost billions, but it wouldn't be billions of dollars.
It'd be stop making bombs.
And trillions of jewels. Yes, but it would be Ramon, jewels.
Have a look.
And those jewels.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Ramon, if you have a look, say, over the last 250 odd years, the periods where we've gone ahead really well have been when we've come into a new energy form, which has really taken us along. So we come into steam, that really big impetus, and that's when then we provided a lot more food a lot easily. So then the people started getting educated. Then if you look at America, the big age in America, the 50s and the 60s, when it really sort of blossomed there, you had a lot of energy and in fossil fuel, and with that there, education was like huge, right? Where now the education's gone back to sort of a pay system, debt system. But until we can get energy that allows that to happen again, we're really just going to puddle around the edge of the dam, aren't we?
Yes, that is precisely it. Until, this crypto thing is going to be huge. Right now, it's still about money, but eventually they'll figure out that crypto is really about information exchange and energy because it consumes energy, but also it's computing power. And all that computing power and that information exchange, the validation of information, the ability to run algorithms for checking and validating information in an objective way, the transfer of value through information will supplant a fiat-based system, and it will necessitate electrical system.
And I just hope they don't feel the need to start regulating it too soon, because it has to have its failures to work. And that's right. When we go back, we were talking before about the capitalist system. The original capitalist system, you go back to England with the cotton mills. You'd build a cotton mill, up to date, best technology you had. 8 years later, I'd built one that was that much better. By about the 15th year, you were bankrupt. If you look at the car industry, you go back into the early car industry, and until they started protecting the big companies, it was the same. You'd go in, and if you weren't renewing everything around the 12th year, by the 18th you were bankrupt, finished, gone. And really, I hope they don't regulate it. I hope they just let it go. Yeah, people will get burned on the way, but that's how you learn, isn't it? By mistakes.
Well, yeah, we're still.
I got to get some.
There's one religion, which is the religion of authority, and we believe in the power of government. And until that's cured, it's going to be difficult for us to really make a forward leap in human momentum and human energy, because where government works is the same with religion, where it works. unifying people behind a cause. But then by meddling with people and with their ideas and doing things like subsidizing bad ideas, it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And that is solely and plus there's the whole atrocities thing. I mean, governments are replete with examples of atrocities because of what we know about human nature, what we know about why people, how people will behave in certain social experiments. So we have the data. We have enough science right now to make a great leap forward. We just don't have the concentration on it because the technology and the media and our own narcissism as a species keeps us. And when it does that, people fall back into archaic thinking. And you see a surge in popularity for Viking programs and things that we really cannot afford to go back to. Like tribalism is not an affordable solution for 8 billion people on this planet. So what can we, and I mean affordable in a human cost. I don't mean affordable in a physical cost. I mean, we cannot afford to allow people to hurt children in the way that tribalism has over the time. We cannot afford to have the tribal wars that we've had. And people only fall back into their interest in the ancient ways because the modern ways failed them on some level. And why would the modern ways fail them on some level? Because it's not scratching a spiritual itch. And that's where the plasma electromagnetic cosmology can scratch the itch, because it has access to the symbols of the ancients. It has access to the meaning. It has access to where the things came from and how they're connected. Why the Eye of Horus, the pineal gland, and etc. Where did the cross come from? Why is it so important? These things, they give people the meaning while giving them a scientific context. There's really no other easy way to have that kind of solution. So it's my hope that over time, people, the mainstream does come to conform to the plasma electromagnetism more and more. If they're ready to admit the dark energy is fake, that's a big progress, because a few years ago, I mean, they're totally convinced. Now, undoing the mechanism whereby the propagandists go and teach the bad stuff, right? They go and they teach the classic black holes. Classic black holes have been debunked for at least 10 years, okay? But they're still teaching it to little children. And in movies, I mean, the classic black hole is in big blockbuster films. Why? Because the classic black hole came out in 1967. Let's say by like 80 something, it had a movie named after it, and then it snowballed. It's going to take time to undo the classic black hole. And in the meantime, the astronomers, they're moving on.
My leg.
They'll come to electrical engines, but it may take another 100 years. I don't know how long it'll take.
Oh, yes. Great.
It's hard to get bad ideas, is the summary of that.
Yep. So, no, that's very interesting. I think Greg's had to disappear for a little bit. But, getting back to that with China before, I always like how they've sent their young people all around the world to learn a bit. And like you said, the big thing they've got to do now is get their quality control up.
Yeah, if they can do that, and also, overthrow the whole communist regime thing. But mankind
that comes down to the power, the protection of power, doesn't
it? It comes down to power structure, human power structures, and also the will. I mean, people, they themselves have to realize when they're oppressed and when things aren't fair and aren't right. Until we get to that point where the immune system finally kicks it out, sort of like burning witches, right? It's like in Monty Python, right? They just wanted to burn someone. It wasn't really that they had a witch. They just wanted to burn her. Yeah. Until humans were done with burning witches and ripping out hearts, it remained a problem. It was a good thing that Cortez and the Spanish stopped heart sacrifice in Mexico. We don't give any credit to the Spanish for that. We only blame them for spreading the smallpox. It turns out they weren't the first to spread the pox on the continent, by the way. Chinese brought the pox in the 1430s. But, no one gives them credit for coming along and saying, hey, ripping out the hearts of your neighbors and sacrificing their daughters to the planet Mars is bad. And, they didn't want to stop, but they had to. But there were tribes in North America that did not stop. There was a tribe that didn't stop until 1903, So, I mean, bad ideas persist because there's a lack of will to say no to the bad idea. And then when you have grants behind bad ideas like dark matter, then you have a continuation. Now, is there a spiritual reason behind that? Is dark matter propped up because of Satan and stuff? I couldn't answer that. I could say though that people's interest in darkness is a little too strong right now, and I don't know if that's connected to where the solar system is around the Milky Way, or if it's connected to what's happening in the government making people feel pessimistic, or it's because we're responding as a species to mutually destroying our planet and feeling kind of guilty about that and how we treat each other. All of the above, maybe. When you have a food system based on blood sacrifice, you have a medicine that's based on the stem cells of aborted fetuses. You have all these dark things. I think it'll tend to make a belief in darkness, and yet, what does the PIM provide us? When we look at that galaxy spinning there, I don't notice the darkness. What I notice is the marvel of the light, the marvel of the order, the marvel of the structure, the marvel of the power that is coming from that. Yes. And believe it or not, that is some of the positive things that do remain in some of the traditional religions, because the basis of the religions in the very beginning was, of course, based on something real. It was based on the PIM. It was based on what we went through as a species. And if we can retain that as we morph over the next 1,000 years, and the scientific period finally supplants the religious period, if we can retain that and engineer our way towards a better outlet, I think that we could do it. I think not only could we survive, we could restore and get rid of all the toxicity that we're putting everywhere. I mean, there's plastic now, proven microscopic plastic in the tuna. If we can do all that, then we can justify going and spending money that should be spent on going to Mars and going to Venus. Otherwise, it's just projects.
David Talbot.
So what you say, Ramon? What you say, Ramon, is... Oh, okay, sorry, Bree.
Go ahead, finish. Go ahead. I can wait.
I say what you say then, Ramon, is we should look at cleaning up our backyard before we worry about going and looking at anyone else's.
Yep. I mean, Jordan Peterson's got it right. Clean up your own bedroom first.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to interject. David Talbot says, how did we become so limited in our thinking that we ignore this gigantic sea of plasma and look for some little microscopic black hole? It's just beyond ridiculous. Yeah. I always remembered that.
There's this wonderful, powerful force that's guiding everything, structuring everything, flowing everything, and yet we're like, well, look at all the stuff we can't see. Yeah. The so-called dark matter. That's the interesting stuff. We can't measure it or see it. Let's spend billions of dollars going in this. It's totally Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it is a literal what is going on with, and that's why I say we exited the age of enlightenment. There were two cosmologies that emerged in 1927, and all because Einstein was a rock star, it the wrong one became the dominant one, and it is affecting us spiritually. There is no doubt that it is connected to how we do medicine, how we do society, how we do military. Even our military could be better. Not only could it be more powerful, but it could be more humane at the same time, right? Tesla, this is an interesting thing. Do you know that Nikola Tesla gave the United States the idea for the nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile? Do you know that? He predicted the whole 20th century on like 2 pages in his autobiography. Okay, when he gave them the idea, he did so because he knew that only the United States, at that time at least, when it was still a positive force, when it had not been taken over by the Federal Reserve System yet, he knew that only the United States would be capable of standing up to the powers that were rising, that were planning to destroy human nature. And the harnessing space energy will do the same thing, because if all the nations of the world have access to the grid of space energy and the ability to generate thunderbolts, then none of them will want to, because the threat will be, war will become obsolete. There will be no reason to have any national wars, and you won't have to have a globalist, tyrannical dictating bureaucracy to control everyone and have no individual local control. You can have separate nations. They just won't be capable of actually fighting each other because the stakes will be too high. And that is a beautiful outcome. It's sort of like two guys carrying if one guy's carrying a 45 and one's carrying a 44 Magnum, they're going to treat each other pretty nicely the vast majority of the time because they both see that the other one is loaded. And that is a beautiful thing. That's something in martial arts that we acknowledge in the teaching of martial arts, is that when you get connected to the real energy, the martial knowledge creates peace. When you're not connected to the energy and you don't see your classmates and everything as potential dangers, then you become arrogant and you become dangerous.
That's true.
And that is the fundamental problem, is the disconnection.
Mutually assured
and from each other.
Mad.
Yep. Yeah. It is completely mad. Burning fuel to make energy is mad.
Yeah. It worked through the Cold War. We made it to the phony Cold War.
You say that, but look, it just comes back, right?
I know.
The bad ideas weren't destroyed; they were hidden. Yuri Bezmenov, he warned us of everything, but we didn't listen. As each generation arrogant. The Bible makes that clear. Every generation is arrogant.
So did John Kennedy. He wanted to dismantle the nuclear weapons. They killed him. They didn't want.
He was in the way of a load of things. He was in the way of the communists. He was in the way of the New World Order, and he was in the way of the Federal Reserve. So he and also apparently had pissed off the mob. So it wasn't that hard, apparently.
Well, everything he had planned was right, but they just didn't want that. They want confusion and war and disinformation.
My theory is that because of the nature of cosmic rearrangement, we'll either get with the PIM or the PIM will get us, and we won't really have it. And it may be sooner than I want or think. It may be coming. The way that things are inverting now, the nonsense that's happening, it's hard to see that it can't tend towards catastrophe, human level catastrophe, if not grander.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But the good news is the PIM will still be there. It's all around us at all times.
At all times. We are.
It's in our DNA. It's in our minds. It's connecting hearts. It enables me to do my work at the clinic. Speaking of which, I got to be jumping off because I gotta wake up and go to clinic in the morning.
Well, I had a great talk, bud. As always.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
We went a little over time, and that was good.
Yeah,
right.
you might break
it,
it. Yeah, no problem, Andy. It's nice to meet you. I can't wait to talk to you again. You might break it up into a couple episodes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this was fun.
Thanks,
Andy. What's that, Andy?
I think you'll need to break it up into 3.
Hey, we'll see. Maybe it's only 2 hours and 38 minutes. That's 2 shows.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Very good talk. I've enjoyed listening, and I've listened to you in the past, Ramon, and it's always good.
Yeah, always fun, Andy.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind of you to say.
Ramon, always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
Yes.
Have a good night, guys.
Okay, take care.
Good day.
See you on the flip side.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Bye. And that is our chat on Atlantis. We kind of got off subject there at the end a little bit, but it was a good talk. I enjoyed it. All right, I'm going to come out and say hello to you. Are you still there, Rick? You still with us? Oh, it's Grouch. You hear Grouch? Okay, that's cool. Hey, thanks for the help. It was nice. It was cool. I enjoyed it. It's a little different, I have to go out here now. Okay, well, maybe you just don't feel like talking. Come out here to the chatters. They feel like talking. All right. Who do we got? Holloway, you still here? Covered a lot of topics. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, it was good. The thing I liked about his talk on Atlantis that really made me think was when he said that we have this real thin crust, which we do. I really don't know how many miles. Does anybody know how many miles thick the crust is? I'm thinking something like 16. It's not much, is it? You want to hear one of my tunes? Oh, wow. Jeez.
Sorry, I was just talking with Neil Gregg.
Oh, yeah?
On Discord here.
Okay.
Yeah, I just.
All right, I can help you out.
I was just gonna leave, but then I saw him pop on, and I wanted to say hi to him for a few minutes.
Oh, we had quite a few here.
I'm off to bed soon.
Okay.
Oh, I know. I was watching the show.
Yeah.
I'm still watching the show.
It was good. Ramon was right on. I thought it was a good talk, and Andy, he added to it. I thought it was good. I'm going to say hi to everybody. Brandy, Robert Diggins, there's Grouch. And I see you in the chat room, but I don't hear you. Strange Days, Holloway Arts, Robert, Jenny Simon. Hello, Jenny. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What state does Ramon live in again?
Ramon, Kentucky. My
Kentucky.
Mom's hometown.
Robert, his clinic is in Kentucky somewhere. Yeah.
Kentucky.
Robert asked the question of where Raymond's clinic was.
One of my mom's favorite songs was "My Old Kentucky Home," so
it's
kind of a second
Jenny.
home for me. Renegade, hello.
Yes, Jenny, he does have a channel, but he doesn't post very often on it.
Who's that? Oh,
Jenny was asking, does Raymond have a channel?
St. Pauli girl? Jenny? Earth Tribe? Oh, I see. Okay, that's cool. Well, I got a few ideas for something else to show, to fill in. We got to do 3 hours, then we're going to start part 2.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I gotta go to bed. I'll catch the rest of it later when I wake up in the morning.
Okay. All right, man. Well, you know me. I'm a glutton for punishment.
Well, you're just, a little crazy, but that's okay.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as normal.
No.
Thank you, Brandon.
I wouldn't want to be freaking normal.
Yeah.
Sheeple. No, thank you.
Right. So, all right, Brandy wants to hear a song, so I'm going to play a song, and then while it's playing, I'm going to find something else. I'll be back, and then we'll talk.
Night, everyone. Night, Greg.
Night,
Thanks for the show. Good show.
Thank you. So we're gonna close this show out I don't want to add a bunch of weight to it. We're at 2 hours 51 minutes. I'm going to play a song, close it out, start the new one, and then we'll go from there, okay? Thank you. I'll be back.
We'll do that, Greg.
Yes, I'll be back. You stay there.
Oh, we will.
Roman.